Okay, going live. And I believe we are live now. So, how are you doing today, Julie?
I'm doing well, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you for coming. Thank you for stopping by. You know, all learners are always eager to learn a lot of information when it comes to jobs, careers, you know, learning to tech in general. So I know that your journey, it's one of those unique ones that a lot of people can learn from and take advice from. And that's why I was so excited to get you to talk to us today. Let's just get started with some of the basics. So can you tell me a little bit about you, your background, what you do?
Sure. And thank you again for having me. I'm really excited to be able to share my story. Hopefully it will help some of the learners out there to also shoot for their dreams. So my background, I am a pharmacist and I'm also a mom who decided to switch gears and go into tech. I felt that tech would be kind of have more doors open for me. So I wanted to explore that further. The reason why I had stepped down from my pharmacy role was to be home with my children. And during that time, I wanted to add programming to my skill set to differentiate myself. And after learning programming, I knew I just wanted to keep going, and here I am. Before I had stepped down, I also had various roles within pharmacy. I started as a pharmacy clerk, then intern, pharmacist, and I even landed a corporate role in pharmacy where I helped with a really big project on changing the pharmacy label. And the label now includes a little dosing chart to help patients kind of see what time of day they should take their medications. And that way, if they have multiple of these prescriptions, then they can line them up and be able to see which ones they should take in the morning and which ones in the evening. Because of that role, I wanted to go into tech and do something like that again, where I could have such a big impact, where I could do something where it has an impact on millions of users. And I think we might have lost Fede. Fede, are you there? And, looks like we might have lost Fede. Hello.
Hey, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
My laptop completely shut down. I'm sorry. So let's just yeah, it just decided to quit on me. You know, life stuff, it happens.
That's awesome.
So can you just start from the beginning again? Just tell me you were telling, I was asking you, I wanted to ask you if pharmacist is something that was related to code and programming, and like that's why you thought that programming was kind of like the natural progression for you. Is that were you using programming before as a pharmacist?
I was not using programming before as a pharmacist. However, as on the business side, I did speak to developers to help. I'm sorry if you didn't hear my story about working on the prescription label. But when our team had changed the prescription label, we had to work with developers to work on some changes in our software in order for pharmacists to verify this new dosing chart. And I wanted to be in that same role again. I knew that I couldn't maintain that role with children because I wanted to stay home with my kids during that time. So I had to leave, and figured if I got into programming, maybe I can go back and do something similar where I could have an impact and I could have a say and I could build something for millions of people.
No, I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned that you wanted to build things and be impactful, because I feel like that's something that a lot of people go into when they're trying to go into tech. They realize that you build things other people use, and that's like very exciting, and you work on problems and challenges that are very hands-on. And sometimes other kinds of careers don't really give you that chance to be so close to what you're building, and that that kind of like you almost feel it every day, like, oh yeah, I did that, I coded that, I built that. So I think that probably is going to resonate with a lot of people that are interested in getting into tech. Do you did you have any process when it came to what part of tech to focus on? Like, how did you decided I'm going to go this route and not that route? Because a lot of our learners that come to Codecademy had that question. A lot of people are saying, hey, should I do data science? Should I do web development? Should I do something else? How do you decide that?
Yes, to be honest with you, I fell into that same learner where I didn't know what I wanted to do. I just first started picking a language, making sure that I learned that language really well. You want to be able to learn something deeply versus learning multiple languages, but not really diving deep into something. So once I felt comfortable in a language, then I thought, well, maybe I might go into web development because there's a lot of jobs out there for web development. I did not want to do data science because, to be honest, data scares me a little bit. And so I would have to kind of ease into that. But if I really wanted to get into data science, I'm sure that's something that could happen. So I just decided.
Did you go to any communities online, or did you read anything about it? Like, did you do the classic, go to Google, like, what's the best programming field to get into, or what's the most jobs in demand jobs? Like, did you do anything like that?
Actually, I went, when I first got exposure to programming, I started with Codecademy, and there's like a Codecademy quiz to find out like what kind of programmer you are. And web development was on there. But some of the things that I would just do is kind of Google and search like what kind of jobs are available that people are looking for around me, just to kind of get an idea. But one of my good friends told me, what are you passionate about? And I felt that I didn't think that I could think about what I was passionate about. I felt like it was just so hard for some people to get jobs that people might feel like I should just try to get anything that I can. But when I really thought about what I was passionate about, which is education and gamification, that really narrowed my search for jobs eventually. And so I ultimately just really wanted to work on something involving education or working on an education platform.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's useful. I mean, so people right now around the world are taking courses with Codecademy or any other platform online, being able to say, okay, let me take a step back. What is it that I'm interested in? Am I interested in this field or that field? Am I interested in this work or that work? And then kind of like work your way backwards and say, well, if I want to get there, what are the technologies that they use? What is more typically used here or there? And those are the technologies I need to focus in learning. Would you say that since you went through the process, I guess, of just exploring programming in general, you went from zero to, starting from zero. Do you find it true that any programming language that you start with, it sort of like builds up into your repertoire, or just being good at coding in general, like problem solving and looking at how code works? Like, some people might argue, hey, you should go C++, you should go Python, you should go, like, do you feel that regardless of the language you start with, once you figure out, hey, that's the direction I want to go in, and maybe it's a different language, but it wasn't a waste of time learning a different language in the beginning, right?
That is so interesting that you bring that up, because when I first started learning programming, I learned in Ruby. And after about a year of learning Ruby, I switched over to JavaScript because I was thinking of doing web development. And at the time I was like, gosh, did I just waste a whole year of learning Ruby if I'm not going to be using Ruby? And it really turns out that it really wasn't a waste of time, because that was when I learned the fundamentals and the basic concepts that really applies to more difficult things. And I have mentioned that I thought I had wasted my year, but I really didn't, because it was so much easier for me to pick up a new language having already had Ruby under my belt. And when I switched, I had also did Python. I also did JavaScript, and I was just learning a couple of new languages. I also learned C, and C was actually, to me, really helpful to learn because it helped me understand more of the computer science concepts, of really how the data is working kind of underneath the hood. So
Oh yeah.
even though I don't use C, it was really helpful for me to kind of learn it a little bit more deeply, and that helps me with understanding how data kind of works.
So
And
it sounds like you have a very, it sounds like you have a very background, I mean, a very diverse sort of background. Like you touch a few languages and they all sort of like brought something different to the table. Like they just kind of like shine a different light into what it is to its coding and programming and kind of like the techniques behind it.
yeah, absolutely. I would recommend starting with any language first, as long as it's something not too low level, but starting with any language. I started with Ruby, but I hear a lot of people starting with Python or even JavaScript. And then once you are comfortable with that, I suggest learning something a little bit lower level like C or something similar, just to get that computer science background. And then just keep going forward, starting to learn a little, a framework here and there. And if you want to get into web development, I started with Node, but now I'm working back in Ruby and Rails. So you really
Full
don't know.
circle.
Exactly. You really
It's
don't
going full
know
circle. Yeah.
where you're going to end up.
Do you okay, so let's back up for a moment and talk about you just talked about how you ended up using Ruby, which is now at your current position. So let's talk about that journey and how you got there. So you start zero, it's day one. Julie decided she wants to be a programmer. So can you kind of like try to summarize what it's like, that whole journey of like, this is how it started, this is like, how often did you code every week? How often, was it in days? Did you measure in hours? When, I want to know, when did you feel that you were job ready? Did you go to communities online to find like portfolio ideas? Did you build some ideas on GitHub? Or did you have friends help you? Do you do any pure coding? Like, I just want to understand what was the journey that you took that got you to be successful and land the job that you have today.
Sure. And actually, I had my first exposure to programming, I believe, when I was 17 in high school. I took an intro to computer science course and failed miserably. And so I hadn't looked at programming all these years until I had stepped down from my pharmacy job, when I spoke with a friend who loves his job as a software engineer and said that he loves logic puzzles and solving problems. And I said, I love doing those things. So that's when I decided, go to Google one day and say, how do I learn programming? And Codecademy actually was the first thing that popped up. So I made an account that day and I started learning. I will say that for the first year, I was learning by myself, solo. I didn't join any groups. I had a rough time just trying to stay motivated without some support or a friend to be accountable with. And so I only started learning about 1 hour a day. At the time, I also wasn't sure if this is just a hobby or if this is going to be a career. So I started about 1 hour a day, and I might go for a couple of weeks at a time here and there where I didn't do any programming. And when I came back, I realized how much I had forgotten.
Mm-hmm.
So a good tip would be just make sure at least get in something every day, even if it's just 5 minutes, if you can.
And what was the
But
tipping point? When did you decide, okay, I'm going all in now?
that would happen when COVID had began in 2020, and there's something called Code in Place, where Stanford computer science instructors had led a huge effort, about 10,000 students, 900 section leaders, for something called Code in Place, where we were going to learn the first 5 weeks of their intro to computer science course. And the section leaders are there to meet with you every week to work on a computer science or one of the coding problems every week. And after the 5 weeks was over, you make a final project, and then you can kind of choose where you want to go from there. And I felt like learning in a community was just so different from learning on my own. When I learned in a community, I was putting a lot more hours. I would say at least 3 hours a day going through that course with now friends, and just having that community, having people to talk to and answer questions. And also anybody who has questions, you can help answer. And it really made me feel good that I was able to contribute back.
It totally makes sense. Yeah. I mean, it's like anything, right? It's like going to the gym or any other project that you take. Like when you are in it with other people, just there's like a little bit of extra motivation, a little bit of extra camaraderie, and talking to other people. It just kind of like keeps you going, right? Like it's just to me, it makes total sense that you were sort of like dabbing into coding a bit, and then once you found a community and a group that were saying, yeah, we're all on this together, that's when it sort of like clicked in your mind that yes, this is something that I want to put more time into, or more effort into.
Totally.
So
And ever since
you
then,
joined that, and then what?
I was going to say, ever since then, I only learned in communities pretty much. So after the Stanford course, I went on to do Harvard CS50 course, also in a community that we built to complete that course. And then after that, I did kind of go a little bit onto web development on my own. But earlier this year, I joined a boot camp, but it wasn't a boot camp that people may have heard of before. It was called All Aboard Boot Camp, led by John Crepesi, and he wanted to help underrepresented groups break into tech. So he decided that he was going to make a boot camp, and after the boot camp was over, you just do a final project. And it wasn't really until that boot camp and doing that capstone project for the boot camp where I felt that maybe I am ready to to find a job. And
Okay. What was your capstone project about? Did you use like a framework? How involved was this?
Yeah, so the boot camp was 4 weeks long, and in the 4 weeks, you're learning Ruby, Rails, a little bit of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So my final project was a full stack project that, and because I was so passionate about education, I wanted to build something that would help me while learning in communities to have all of my materials in one location. So since I learned in communities during this time, there's always multiple apps that you might use to talk to somebody, like Slack. And then there might be announcements that would go through email. And there might be assignments that are through another portal. And so I created an education platform where users can go to whichever class they were enrolled in and then access all of those things in one location. And I created a little chat thing in there too, so that users can talk to each other.
Wow. And just for the learners that might not be familiar with what when you say a full stack project, some might not be familiar with that. Can you explain the kind of technologies and programming languages that you used?
Sure. So Ruby would be like the backend language, and then Rails would be the framework for the backend. But the way Rails works, you can kind of incorporate front end into it as well. So you add your HTML and your CSS and your JavaScript all in one, and you would be able to have a full stack project where, in my case, the education platform will have, let's say, user data, which would be in the back end in a database. And the front end would be what you see on the page. So users can click and add themselves into whichever course that they want to enroll in.
Wow, that's awesome. So if I understand it, as I heard it, you build this project after the bootcamp, and you realize you look at your work and you say, wow, I built all this front end, back end, full stack. Like I feel like I know enough that it will be worth starting applying for jobs. So once that happens in your mind, you say, this might be the next step. How do you go about learning how to write a resume, learning how to do a good cover letter, where you should be applying? Like there's so many companies you could be applying for, like all the application process. Did you do any interview prep? So what were the next steps that you took?
That's a really great question. And to be honest with you, I don't know if I ever felt job ready. I felt like I was comfortable enough to find a place that at least provided mentorship. So I really wanted to look for something like an apprenticeship or an internship to start, because I didn't feel like I was ready just to be put in and then automatically start working. Okay. So I focused my efforts on looking for people that were really hiring definitely junior roles, but mainly apprentices. Okay. And my story with looking for a job is probably not your typical story that you hear, because I really, when I felt that I was ready, I immediately went on to Codecademy to look to see if they were hiring, because I knew I wanted to be there. And luckily, at the same time, they were also hiring for apprenticeship roles. And so I was like, oh my gosh, is this a sign? Like I'm on this. And I focused all of my time crafting my cover letter for it. Codecademy's interview or application process, it's very transparent. So they ask you for like 3 questions and make sure you answer it in your cover letter. So I didn't have to have a lot of my own material that I needed to add into a cover letter, but I answered the 3 questions. And I probably spent several days just rereading it and rewriting it and making sure that just because I knew
I'm curious to know, do you have to use any like externals? Do you have any resources, like maybe from your bootcamp or from the other courses that you took in communities? Were there any resources that you looked at, like, okay, this is a typical junior level resume, or this typical like cover letter? Like, do you use any resources, or do you just kind of like trusted your gut and said, well, this looks good and this is what I'm going to submit? Do you have anyone like proofread it, for example? Do you have anyone read it?
I feel like I must have Googled a template. Like, for example, in the first paragraph, you might just introduce yourself or something like that. And then because it asked for the 3 questions, it was really easy for me to just answer those 3 questions and then have a closing statement. So I did Google some, and I might have read like what verbiage, how you might want to present yourself. I can't remember. Yeah, I can't remember what I looked at, but definitely have multiple people proofread it for you. I think I had like 5 people proofread it for me, so in different stages. And my cover letter originally was 2 pages, but I got it down to 1 page. Just make sure your verbiage is direct and clear and to the point, so you don't want to fluff it with too many words.
Okay. And do you do any interview prep? Like once you submitted the resume and your cover letter, like once you submitted the application, you realize, okay, if this goes through, the next step is going to be they contact me and we go through questions. So were you already sort of like thinking ahead and saying, okay, I'm going to start looking around typical interview questions, typical coding questions, making sure that my GitHub repo is clean and everything very tidied up. Do you do any of these kind of interview prep?
Yeah, good point. I did take a data structures and algorithms course just to understand some of the basic data structures and algorithms that will help you solve, for example, leak code problems. And I did do a few leak code problems just to make sure that I could solve some of the easy ones.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like that course that I took was kind of gave me the basics, but I didn't really get deep into the more complicated data structures, which is okay because I didn't end up having to use much of it. Maybe indirectly I had to, but for example, for my interview here, it was a pair programming session. And so it wasn't your typical whiteboard session where they give you a problem and you whiteboarded it out and then you code it. So it was a little bit different than that. I also, as a part of being in WNB.RB, which is a group that I'm in for women and non-binary folks, I started creating a interview prep kind of group where I would just meet with a few folks and we would solve leak code problems together.
Oh, okay. That's
yeah,
smart. Awesome.
yeah, I like to, like I said, I like to learn in a community and I like
Yeah.
to collaborate. So I wanted to have something that I could work on with other folks who are kind of going through the same thing. And so,
I mean, it sounds like a fair statement that collaboration and working with others is what got you like at least half the way there. Like it sounds like you got really serious about learning to code when you got in a community with all the people that were learning to. And it sounds like you lean on that community for code practice, collaboration projects. Like you just kept coming back to that. So it sounds fair to say that that aspect of collaborating with others and finding a niche community or some group that can help you, that was one of the key to your success.
yeah, I think so. And also making sure you have a good support system just within, maybe you're not working with them, but some close friends that will help you stay accountable and you can help them stay accountable as well. Just having that
Nice.
support, the community, yeah, really, really excelled my learning anyway.
Nice. So I'm curious. Okay, so we talked about your journey from zero to the boot camp, learning to code, feeling job ready. You prepared the cover letter, you prepared the resume, submit it. You went through interview and prep, a little bit of interview and prep. So you get the call, you've been accepted into the role, and now we have a lot of learners that they say it's nerve-wracking because there's this thing, imposter syndrome, right? That creeps on you and you feel like, oh no, like I learned, like I didn't really like, I didn't get like a college degree on this, I'm not that smart, I don't really know that much, what's going to happen my first day, they're going to ask me questions that I don't know about, it's going to be a mess. Could you speak a little bit of like what it's like to get into your first role in tech and like kind of like checking your expectations, checking yourself and like kind of believing a little bit in yourself, say, hey, if they invited me in, it must be that I'm good enough. And like, I'm just gonna take it one day at a time and keep growing and learning.
Yeah, all of those things that you said resonated with me because I was very worried before I started my first role. What if I'm going to be so stressed out that I don't know anything and I'm going to spend all my time Googling and looking things up, and will I have time to complete all the tasks that they're asking of me? And well, I think it's very fair that your first role is probably either an apprenticeship role or a junior role, and they know that you're still learning and they shouldn't expect you to have that, to know everything. I mean, even seniors admit that they don't know everything and they also look things up. So my experience with starting was actually, and I still wear my imposter hat syndrome, my imposter syndrome hat. And I every day I have to think about, well, they chose me because they believed in something in me. They believe that I can figure things out, and that's what I'm here to do. I'm here to learn and help solve problems. And there's people here that can help me whenever I need. The community at Codecademy is very, very supportive, very friendly, and always willing to help if I need it.
Because I know, I'm asking this question because I know that kind of like in a side note a bit, there is a lot of emphasis from current professionals in developer roles where they will say that even though there's this sort of conflicting interest where you are eager to start a role, whatever it is, and at the same time, they will say your first role matters because if you, especially as a junior in an internship, apprenticeship, a junior role, being in a place where they would allow you to kind of like feel comfortable and understand your limitations and help you grow and help you become the developer that you want to become and that professional go into the full role of a developer. It seems like that conversation always happens kind of like back and forth, where it's like, it really matters that you find a place where, like you mentioned, people understand that you have, there are limits to what you know, and they accommodate those limitations. And at the same time, you might be feeling like, look, whoever calls me first, that's the job I'm accepting. So like, did you feel a little bit of that tension? Like, I know that you said that that was very aligned for you, that when you felt job ready was at the same time Codecademy was looking for apprenticeships. So it sort of like felt like a straight line. But did you have that conversation, that monologue internally saying, how much does it matter where I get a job? I just need a job, whatever it is. Did you have that moment of just thinking, whatever it is, I'm fine with it?
I have had fears that I would have to select a job that I could take, whatever it is. But I have also heard that you don't want to do that depending on, okay, so if you're going to interview and the interview is going okay, and then you're finding out maybe things that you don't feel that would be a good fit with that company. Not saying that the company is bad, but maybe you don't fit very well with the company, but you take it anyway because you feel like that's the only job that you can get. You might kind of burn out, depending on, I guess I'm just saying this hypothetically because I'm not in that situation, but I feel like I might burn out if it wasn't a good culture fit. Other things might be going on. I don't know if I would feel like I belong, and that could leave like a bad taste in my mouth if it was my first role and I just didn't feel like I fit in. Would that prevent me from wanting to further pursue engineering? I don't know. But I have multiple times thought about, I'm going to have to apply to multiple places. I'm just going to get the first one that accepts me. I do hear that a lot, actually.
Okay.
So
it sounds like, yes. So it sounds like you're leaning more towards the part of saying, even if you're desperate for a job and you just want to accept any job, it really does matter. Like for example, if you try to hypothetically imagine yourself in a role in a different company that's not Codecademy, and you think about how you're going through it here at Codecademy, you realize there's so much value in finding the right fit for that. So like, if you had to go back and do it again, you'll probably try to find a company like that has those rather than not, right?
Right. And I would like to think that there's a lot of jobs out there looking for software engineers that you should be able to kind of pick and choose what your fit is. I couldn't imagine a different place working, to be honest with you. I feel very welcomed here and I feel very supported here. If I have a question, I could ask anybody. There's no one here that will kind of shoot you away.
That's great. That's awesome to hear. Well, we've been talking for a while and we've walked through your entire process, like your journey from beginning to code and learning what programming is all the way to getting into a role that you're currently holding. Do you have any sort of like general advice or tips that you want to share with everyone that might be going through the same things that you were going, of learning online, being insecure, not knowing which programming language to focus on, what career to go? not knowing when you're job ready. I've gone through 6 months of tutorials. Is that good enough? How many portfolio projects do I need? 2, 3? Is this a good enough portfolio project? Should we be more involved? Like, do you have any like general thoughts on advice? Like if you had to go to a group of people and say, you can be developers too. Here's some of the things that I learned along the way that could help you.
I think some of the advice I would give is, one, make sure you're learning something deeply, not superficially and jumping around. Whatever language that you pick, it's fine. And 2, definitely work on projects. I had this bad habit of going through tutorials but not building my own projects. And when you're building your own projects, that's when you're really learning. You're really trying to figure out how things might work, not handed to you. And really don't compare yourself, because I personally felt that it took me a much longer time to understand a concept versus somebody else. And if I kept comparing myself to other people, maybe I feel like I wouldn't be good enough. But I mean, my role now kind of proves that I can do it. And then just make sure you have a good network. I believe networking is key here, making sure that you put yourself out there, you meet new people, learn about them. Having a support group and learning with people, just that community. I can't say enough about learning in a community and learning publicly.
Nice. I like it. I mean, I'm in community all the time, so I like that you're praising community so much. That's a bit of a bias there for me. Let's look at the chat, see if anybody had any questions. Okay, so one of the users was asking, can someone with no coding experience enter a coding bootcamp and become a software engineer in 6 months? So do you think that it's possible in a 6 months time frame to learn coding and get in a bootcamp and I guess landing a job, I suppose?
I hear that all the time, honestly. It took me 2 years, but I also wasn't doing this full time, and I couldn't have done a boot camp because of the hours that were expected. I have 2 young kids, and so most of my time is spent with the children. But yeah, I hear a lot about people who get into coding boot camps, get a job in 6 months. I don't know how common that is, but I have heard about it. You know, some people might post on YouTube that they got a job within 6 months. I also think that it depends on the person. So for me, I don't think I would have been able to do that because I needed some time to have concepts sink in. So I felt like 6 months might not be a long enough time for myself, but it could be for someone else.
Okay, that's fair. Yeah, and I mean, bootcamps themselves, they have different timelines. The typical bootcamp might be 3 months, but I've heard of bootcamps that are a year long. They put less hours every week and they're more accommodating on like if you already have a job or whatever life situation you're in. So I suppose the answer is yes, depends. The answer is depends. Like people have done it in 6 months. So it's not impossible, but it depends on your situation and what you're trying to achieve, I suppose. And everybody learns differently, like you said. So some people are quicker in some concepts and then they get stuck on React or on other framework and like that's it. You get hit a rut. Another question, did you construct a resume of projects that you created to get the internship? And how do you create your resume so that companies can see your experience in engineering? So 2 parts of the question. What about, can you speak a little bit about the projects that you build?
Yes, I think that's a really good point. 2 of the projects that I ended up putting on there, I added a Python Tetris game that I created, and I put a why behind why I'm adding it to my portfolio and why I created it in the first place. And the why was I wanted to help my kids learn how to play Tetris. And if I code it myself, I could have certain pieces drop. So I started with the O and the I pieces so that they can understand how it works. And then over time, you increase it. So my reasoning was to help my kids ease into learning how to play Tetris. The second one, as I already mentioned, my education platform, I created it to solve a problem that I had, which was having everything in one place. If you add that into your resume, I think it would stand out, just so that they can see why you're building something. I forget what the second part of the question was.
The second part of the question was just wondering if you created a resume so that companies can see your experience in engineering. So I'm not sure that the person meant a resume as in the piece of paper, or resume in the sense of like the projects that you were building. If did you build your projects to like thinking these are showcase projects to land a job, or were you building projects for fun? I think that might be more the question.
That's a good point. My first one was for fun, but ended up being on my resume because I thought it was a good story. And the second one was definitely something that I knew I wanted to put on a resume, if that helps answer the question.
Okay.
One of the things to keep in mind when you build your resume is to make sure you're looking at the job description of where you're applying to, and make sure that there's keywords that are in the job description inside of your resume, so that it can kind of get filtered through there.
So tailor it to where you're applying, and make sure that the keywords are right. Makes sense. Someone is curious to know how long it took you to create your first website.
Oh, well, this is a very interesting question because I am very much back end myself, and so I would say my first website might actually be that final project that I created for that boot camp, which really was like a little under 2 years after I started programming. So it just kind of depends. If you immediately start with front end, which I did not do, I didn't start with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. You might create your first website in, I don't know, maybe a month. I mean, I'm not really sure.
I mean, if you're talking about vanilla HTML, you can create a website in 5 seconds. Just write the text and save the document. It's a website. Technically, you can host that. Yeah. You can host an empty website in like 5 seconds. I'm going to answer this one. Are HTML and CSS necessary to learn when becoming a web developer? Yes, HTML and CSS is everywhere on webs. So you will need to know those. How much use of them, it depends on the frameworks and how they're written, like Ruby and Rails, or like React with Node.js. Like how much HTML and CSS you touch personally depends on your role and what kind of developer you are. But that's just the web. The web is built on those technologies. So the answer is yes, you need to do HTML and CSS. Somebody was wondering about how you stay motivated when you were self-studying, and I think you touched on how the community helped you, the network that you work with.
Yeah, and I actually started something very, very cool, and I highly recommend others to do this as well, is I made a Twitter account and I started 100 Days of Code. And every day I would tweet about what I learned or what I did that day. My tweets ended up going a different route where I started sharing my knowledge too. And I think that really helped motivate me, because I wanted to be able to help other people follow what I was learning. And so I would tweet something about maybe a Ruby syntax or something about Ruby, a Ruby tidbit, and then just kind of learn publicly in that way. And I think that really helped me, because when people started seeing that I was doing this, I was on it every single day. I would do something, I would learn something, and then I would tweet about it.
Yeah, and touching on that, for anyone watching, Codecademy has these amazing forums at discuss.codecademy.com, and there's so many people looking for help, and so many people sharing their code and sharing their projects. So go there and try to help someone. And like you were saying, helping people and looking at their code, that's like a skill on its own, and it also motivates you, and you get more used to seeing other people's work and code. So it has a lot of positives, and you start meeting people, you start seeing people online, and like they're going through your journey with you, and it has a lot of positives. So I would say go explore communities and try to find someone there, like some support. I'm looking at the time. It seems like the time flown by. Well, we've been here for a while now. So I think I just want to give you one last chance as any parting thoughts, and to thank you for being here online with us. I'm pretty sure that you've helped a lot of people today, a lot of people that had the same questions that you had when you were going through your journey. So thank you so much for sharing, and the floor is yours.
I really don't have anything else to add. Thank you so much for having me be on here. I am really excited to hear our learners kind of follow in the same path and get to where they want to be. And I'm just so excited to, one, be a part of Codecademy's community, as well as be a part of Codecademy now.
Okay, well, I think with that, we are finished for today. Like I said, thank you so much, Julie, for stopping by. I think, like I said, I think you've helped a lot of people, and maybe we'll have you again in the future if you have more to share. I mean, I'm very curious to know 3 months down the road what it looks like. So thank you, and I'm going to stop the stream now. Okay. All right, so the stream is over. YouTube killed it. So